Hey everybody, this is Jan for Chess24. We got the world champion facing the tournament leader in Wijk aan Zee in round number 11. The tournament is close to the finish line. 3 more rounds to go, including this one. And Magnus Carlsen, the world champion, is 1.5 points behind the leader. None other than Anish Giri, the Dutch number 1 on home turf, has had a great tournament. Now he has to hold or do more, who knows, with the black pieces against Magnus Carlsen. While for Carlsen, of course, it would be a great chance to sort of get back into the tournament, defeat the leader, come within half a point. Easier said than done though. We all know how solid Anish Giri is. Carlsen tries with the move 1 e4 and Giri replies by playing 1 e5, not going for the knight off or the French, where he's done video series recently, but he plays good old 1 e5. And Magnus Carlsen chooses the Italian, which recently has been, I'm not sure if this is statistically backed up, but it feels like it's been even more popular than the Ruy Lopez on the highest levels after bishop b5. The Berlin has been a big roadblock, while the Marshall and other a6 based systems are doing well as well. So Carlsen doesn't want any part of it, plays bishop c4, an opening that Giri himself also plays with the white pieces quite a bit. So 2 big experts of the Italian. Bishop c4, bishop c5, pawn to c3, knight to f6, and pawn to d3. This quiet looking but very venomous setup we've gotten used to. Basically, white's claim is this knight is slightly misplaced against this pawn. Of course, it had to go there on the second move to defend this pawn. But that's what white's hope for an advantage is mainly built around. Game's just starting. Of course, there are many theoretical lines here you could discuss about castles, d6, a6, a5, what move order and so on. But Giri knows all the subtleties of the main lines after short castles. And Magnus decides he's not even going to try to find out what Giri had in mind if he played one of the main lines, which would be short castles here. But instead he plays the ram move, pawn to b4, which attacks the bishop and asks his bishop where to go. Generally, the word on the street was usually that you don't play pawn to b4 if this bishop could still retreat to e7, like black hasn't played d6 yet. And that's the case here. Giri does go bishop e7, which doesn't look very active, but the logic is you can go d5 later, b4 might be a bit of a weakening as well, and for these d5 structures, the bishop will actually be quite okay on this side of the board, not on b6. Nothing wrong with bishop b6 either, but bishop e7 is the computer's first choice. The tactical justification is that white cannot win a pawn here by pushing pawn to b5, which looks tempting, because after knight to a5, knight takes e5, black takes, and now he's a pawn down, but he opens the position with pawn to d5. If this gets taken, queen d5 is not even the best move, but good enough for this double attack. According to computers, a6 is even stronger, but don't ask me why. So, long story short, b5 not a good idea, also not what the world champion has in mind. He just wants to play this structure, knight bd2, and try not to go for any exchanges earlier. Plays d5, bishop b3. With a rare position at the highest levels, Richard Rapport has played this once or twice. Carlsen builds the bathtub, which could be kind of shaky, but in the long run could control a lot of squares if he manages to maintain it. And the good news for him is that Anish Giri started taking some time here, did not blitz out his moves. So first order of business to get Anish out of theory achieved. Giri went for the move bishop to g4, which is very double-edged because his bishop is often not well placed on g4. If it gets asked by h3 later, it has to go to h5. It's missing the action on the queen side. It could be a target for g4 or for knight f1, knight g3. So bishop g4, a very direct move. I'm not sure I like it. There are alternatives like d takes e, queen to d3, probably forcing an endgame of the queen c2. It shouldn't be horrible for black. There's also more direct moves like pawn to a5 could be interesting, leading to complications after b5, knight a7. So I would guess that future theoreticians will not aim for bishop g4 here. Giri, however, has a point after bishop g4, which is that if white goes h3 directly, now he will take. And should this knight recapture, then e4 is en prise. Can't do that. So the queen would have to take, which usually would be great strategically for white. But here, black has the very direct pawn to d4. And white is not in time to protect his queen side. If the bishop goes here, this pawn would drop. So Carlsen, of course, does not allow that, but sidesteps with queen to c2. Sorry, instead of h3. Goes queen c2, trying to keep the tension. Much better move. Now if d4, b5 is favorable for white. So Giri has to slow down, goes d takes e, and bishop to d6, typical maneuver, overprotecting this e5 pawn so that the horsey can maybe be brought towards g6. And Carlsen now asks his bishop to show where it wants to go. Bishop goes to h5, bishop f3. Knight f3 was kind of pointless now. And rook to b1. Deep move by the world champion. Short castle looks more logical, but then a5 bothered him. The point being that after a3 takes, there is a little combination using the fact that this rook is still standing on a1 unprotected. So white would lose a pawn. Therefore, after a5, he would have to play b5, which he probably didn't like. Knight to e7. He wants to maintain his structure on the queen side. And to do exactly that, he goes rook to b1, a5, pawn to a3. Because these pawns, they restrict the black pieces pretty well. A takes b, Giri gains access to the open a file, but there's currently not that much going on here. Giri decides that he should spend a move slowing white down on the queen side, goes b5 himself, stopping knight c4 for good, also stopping white from ever going b5, but it's a double-edged move. This pawn could also become a target for the white pieces. The c6 knight is no longer protected, so I'm not sure if this is a net gain or not, but for now, nothing dramatic has happened. Carlsen continues development. Short castles. Knight to e7, the typical maneuver. Rook to e1, very typical move, freeing the f1 square for the knight if needed later, keeping an eye on the e4 pawn. Standard stuff. Giri plays queen to c8. Last standard, preparing c5, maybe keeping an eye on this. Maybe he wanted to make sure no g4 happens. But we have reached the first key position maybe in this game. The opening was a bit of a success for the world champion because of this bishop. And now he has to find a way to proceed. He would like to go knight to f1 followed by knight to g3. But you can't do that if knight f1 is met by bishop takes f3, of course. So Carlsen plays a humanly pretty nice move and very strong move. I'm saying humanly because it's not the computer's first choice. He plays queen to d3, takes the b5 pawn, and gets ready for knight f1, followed by knight to g3. The computer had a different preference, giving white a big advantage after the move pawn to c4, but that's very, very hard to spot for puny humans, because it would lose a pawn. If black takes here, the knight recaptures, and now takes here, attacking this rook. The rook would have to move. Black takes, the bishop goes back. White is a pawn down, but it turns out that after bishop to g5, the pawn is not the main factor in the position, but the white pieces are just incredibly active, all of them. And the black defense would be very difficult. Still, this is computer stuff. Queen d3, a nice human move. Rook to b8. And Carlsen does not go for the maneuver I've been advocating, knight to f1, to play knight g3, but plays knight to h4 here, which is a pretty good move, clearing the way for the queen and keeping his options open with the other knight. But I believe that knight f1 he did not play because there is a tactical detail way down this line that is almost impossible for humans to spot. So understandable, he didn't go for this, just to show you why. Let's go down the line. So knight to f1, the critical move seems to be rook to d8. Keeps an eye on the queen and threatens bishop takes b4. Making sure that after the natural move knight to g3, black can't take this pawn. So far, I'm pretty sure both sides have calculated this. Also queen to c2, which is the natural way to sidestep. Black is now forced to return here. If he took on f3, then c takes b4. It's very good for white. This queen would enter the action. Black defenses do not hold. So this bishop would have to go back to d6. Knight takes bishop, and I'm assuming, I haven't actually researched, but I'm assuming that both sides calculated this line, which looks okay for black while you're calculating, because the direct approach, knight to g5, doesn't do anything. After rook f8, covering this pawn, if queen to a2, queen to e8, and there's nothing there. The reason this position is good for white is in a pretty crazy move here, which you might know the theme because it was already the computer recommendation a while ago. But here, it's even harder to think of it, I believe. Pawn to c4, blocking his own bishop, which was staring towards f7. But turns out there's just nothing good black can do. Pawn to c5 is a threat, picking up the bishop, and after takes, queen takes, we see this battery hitting the pawn. Rook to f8, knight to g5. Now this is surprisingly lethal because of the open. b-file, because here white has a little combination that just wins the game for him. Knight f7, takes. And boom, white is material up. I know this was a long and somewhat maybe irrelevant line, but actually I don't think it's irrelevant. It shows that even these small maneuvers outside of the opening are so dependent on tactics and calculation. Basically shows what a tough game chess is. So knight f1, the world champion would have played if he had spotted, well, this is at least my reasoning, if he had spotted in this position after bishop to d6, knight to h5, this amazing resource c4. But good luck trying to find that without a computer while calculating. So Carlsen instead goes knight to h4, knight on the rim, but it's actually a fairly standard square for the knight in these lines, anticipating knight g6, which can sometimes be met by knight f5. I'm curious what would have happened after rook d8, which was not played in the game. Pawn to g4 could be a move then. Bishop g6 and queen gets out of the way, queen f3. The black position is still pretty dangerous here. This knight could come here, this could go here, g5 is looming. Some pressure against f7. So things aren't easy for black in this line. And Giri tries to force matters. Goes for the very direct move, knight g6. Now I just mentioned that after knight to g6, knight to f5 is typically a good reply. But in this very position, knight f5 sort of runs into knight to f4, attacking the queen. And it turns out that black is more or less fine. After queen g3, bishop g6, the black pieces are just well placed, and there's no direct attack anymore. So knight f5 is not high on the list, and Carlsen instead decides to exchange on g6. But believe it or not, I believe that after this knight takes g6, most of the tension already disappears from the game, and that Carlsen, looking back, will think about this very position as a missed opportunity. And the move he should have played doesn't look like much, but it does make a difference. After knight g6, bishop g6, the black pieces are just well coordinated. Rook to d8 followed by c5 will come, and he should have played knight df3 instead, bringing more attackers to the king side, after which black's situation is not easy. I'm not sure if he disliked bishop takes f3. Black would get rid of this sort of strange bishop, but after knight f3 here, white would have the two bishops, this bishop still being active, and just, stable advantage, bishop g5 still on the menu. So I'm not sure what black should do here. Knight takes h4 is possible, but here the piece distribution is much different. White is just much faster, bringing his pieces to dangerous squares, and black would suffer. So knight to f3, I think, was the last chance. This might sound early, but the last real chance in this game to create problems for Mr. Giri. Instead, knight takes g6 was played, bishop takes, and as mentioned, now black is solid and in time to cover most of the issues his position has. Knight to f1 played, he goes rook to d8, threatening bishop takes b4, so this queen has to move away. And now another key move, pawn to c5. This powerful bishop on b3 can be blocked by pawn to c4, or if white takes, the queen recaptures and there is a target on c3. Carlsen instead goes bishop to g5, develops, asking this knight what it's up to, but it just gets covered by bishop e7. And yeah, there's just not enough attackers, not enough momentum here on the king side going for Carlsen to do anything. He decides to allow this move, pawn to c4, but after that his bishop remains shut out from the action, and without this light squared bishop it's pretty much impossible to get anything going. The alternative, maybe the safer way to play, was bishop f6, bishop to d5, keeping this guy active. Probably was not played because of rook d5, ed, bishop b1, rook b1, cb, and the position is a bit too simplified for white to have any real winning chances here. Still, after knight g3, as played in the game, pawn to c4 of course happens. This bishop has to go to c2, and you can see it's in bishop jail. It doesn't have any good active prospects, and therefore black has zero problems here. The only question from now on is if black can be better, but the white position remains fairly solid as well after h6, bishop to e3. The bishops do cover all kinds of important squares still, so nothing too dramatic has happened. Giri goes queen c6, keeps an eye on this e4 pawn, and Carlsen opts for knight to f5, allowing this bishop to exchange itself, but the bishop was no longer so bad, keeping pressure, putting pressure on this guy. So it gets exchanged here, g6, king g7, very natural, covering more squares. And once again, with this bishop, white just has no chance of being better. He has a chance of being worse, but he also manages to keep things under control. Rook a1, rook a8, queen to e2, saying, please take my pawn, sir. Discovered attack, winning the queen. But it doesn't happen very often at this level. So queen e2, Giri also probably content having made it out of a dangerous situation. Exchanges some more pieces and the situation simplifies considerably here. Queen d2, targeting this pawn, h5, king h2, once again asking, please take my pawn, after which queen d7 would have been nice for white. Once again, it does not happen. Queen c6, just some solid maneuvering. Queen e2, queen e6, g3, bishop d8. This bishop gets activated. If white exchanged these bishops, he would probably be worse with the silly bishop being left, but he keeps it on the board. And the game ends in a fairly natural move repetition. Knight h7, bishop c1, knight f6 back, bishop g5, knight h7, and a draw is agreed. So not the most spectacular of games, but I believe it had a lot of content early on in this phase out of the opening, where Carlsen got a good position, got what he wanted. Surprised Giri, got a position full of play, full of pieces, full of subtleties, but then maybe due to his not stellar form in this tournament, after queen c8, queen to d3, he does not find a way to put pressure on Anish here. The first chance being knight to f1, the second being after knight g6, knight 2 to f3, both with good chances. The way it went, the game ends peacefully, and that means that Giri at least stays in the joint lead in the tournament. We'll have a look at the cross table if you don't want to see it. End this video now because you want us to. analyze the other games, but here it comes. Anish Giri stays in the lead because the other key game between Alireza Firouzja and Fabiano Caruana ends peacefully, so none of these guys catch Anish, while Jordan van Vreest wins another game against Pentala Harikrishna and moves into the shared second place. Great tournament for both Dutch players so far. Magnus Carlsen, not a great tournament. 6 points out of 11. 1.5 points behind Anish Giri. Still 2 rounds to play, so it's unlikely the world champion will be able to enter the fight for first place in this one. Thanks for watching this video. I hope you liked it, and I'll see you in the next one or in the live commentary. 2 rounds to go in Wijk.